This is Joanne Tan of 10 Plus Brand. The U.S. Supreme Court justices are not above the law. This is intended to be nonpartisan. The overturning of Roe v. Wade is far more than abortion rights. The three-legged stool of our separation of power is no longer holding up. When the judiciary branch is shamelessly becoming a weapon for politics, which is totally contrary to the Founding Fathers' check and balance foundation for our democracy. Roe's overturn is merely the beginning. It does not matter as much whether you are pro-life or pro-choice compared with what is really at stake. This slippery slope of opening the floodgate of overturning the U.S. Supreme Court's own fundamental principle of honoring and upholding prior decisions, stare decisis. Of course, there were cases that were historically wrongly decided, such as racial segregation cases, that the U.S. Supreme Court subsequently overturned with the progression of time. Turning history backward seems to be on today's Supreme Court's radical agenda. If a 50-year-old landmark ruling such as Roe can be overturned, even though vast majority of Americans support Roe, what are next on Clarence Thomas' list to be overturned are not limited only to the rights to contraceptives, same-sex marriages, but will extend to overturning the separation of church and state, EPA's environmental protection rulings that protect clean air and water, Securities Exchange Commission (SEC's) regulations to protect investors against institutional greed, and on and on. It's going to happen very fast. Our democracy is tumbling down when the Supreme Court is corrupted by politics, as shown in the words of Justice Thomas' wife, Ginni Thomas, who frequently alluded to Clarence Thomas as, quote, my best friend, unquote, in messages such as this, quote, the most important thing you can realize right now is that there are no rules in war, unquote, in her text message to Mark Meadows, former chief of staff for the Trump administration. It doesn't matter anymore if a president of the United States committed high crime, tried and convicted, since he can count on SCOTUSes of the same political party to exonerate him, theoretically and practically. This was not thinkable in the Nixon time, but it is a reality today, evidenced by Thomas's dissenting opinion, which supported Donald Trump's request for blocking turnover of important documents to the January 6th committee. Given Clarence Thomas's wife's text message to Mark Meadows saying, quote, there are no rules in war, unquote, and her emails to the White House counsel John Eastman asking to overturn the 2020 election result, Clarence Thomas, nonetheless, in his role as a SCOTUS, rendered his support for Trump without recusing himself. This level of radicalization of a Supreme Court justice by the political passions of the day is a clear and present danger for democracy and our unbiased structure for the rule of law. The U.S. Supreme Court cannot be weaponized for politics and religion. What caused all this? What can be done to save our democracy from becoming a dictatorship? The U.S. Supreme Court's justices, like other branches of the federal government, must be checked and balanced by the legislative and the law enforcement branches, with investigation, impeachment, suspension, and removal in case of high crimes and misdemeanors. The U.S. Constitution never assumed the SCOTUSes to be above the law and be shielded from civil and criminal liabilities. We ask the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Department of Justice to immediately initiate these actions. 1. The Department of Justice must investigate, and the House needs to initiate impeachments against those justices who lied under oath during confirmation hearings about not overturning Roe, and pursue perjury charges against these lying U.S. Supreme Court justices. 2. The Department of Justice must investigate, and the House needs to initiate impeachment against Justice Clarence Thomas for any level of criminal aiding and abetting his wife's criminal participation in the conspiracy to overthrow the 2020 presidential election. We, the people, additionally must take action to impose term limits for all SCOTUSes. A constitutional amendment must be introduced by the legislature to limit every SCOTUS term to be about 18 years, as advocated by Stanford professor Larry Diamond in his book, Ill Wind. At this point, we cannot sit back and do nothing, no matter how strenuous it is to get these things accomplished, especially the long and ardent journey to amend the U.S. Constitution for adding term limits for SCOTUSes. We have to do this, or we descend from the rule of law into dictatorship and Nazism. This is intended again to be nonpartisan. Save our democracy, save our rights. Everyone needs to do something immediately. Please stand for something. We cannot throw away our democratic tradition from our generation with our own hands. Please share and take action. Thank you.